Hello, hello, what is up? What is good? It is time for another manga chat. If you didn't watch the first one, these are very casual, unorganized videos that are just meant to capture some of my thoughts and feelings around some manga that has really moved me lately. Where lately is just sort of a rolling period of time of since I made the last one. This can be a mixture of stuff that I am rereading, stuff that I am reading for the first time that's old, new stuff coming up, stuff that's old but is just getting scanlated now, whatever, anything, no categories, no rules whatsoever. Let's plunge in and talk about the first series. The tiles I cannot cut are next to none, which is a series of Touhou doujinshi that just finished getting scanlated earlier this week. If you don't know what Touhou is, first off, I'm actually a little surprised at this point. Not that it's like common knowledge, but if you're watching this channel, you are not in the realm of common people. But Touhou is a series of shmups made by this person, Zune, which became very, very cult famous for having just really lovable, memorable characters and a fantastic soundtrack. And just a setting that people really want to explore with a variety of genres and presentations and everything. Mahjong is a really, really good fit for this series, not only because when you look at the subgenre of superpower mahjong, which is a pretty large subgenre of mahjong manga, a lot of the common powers the characters have, such as being able to read people's tiles, or being able to cheat with super fast movements, or being able to memorize the location of every tile and track it through different deals and shuffles, powers to manipulate fate and make certain things more or less likely. These are already powers that are very well represented by the Touhou characters themselves. Like, there's a very kind of natural overlap that makes you kind of curious, how will a given Touhou character's power established in the other games translate into Mahjong ability, and how will it manifest during the games? More than that, though, I think just kind of the personality of Touhou and of the setting of Gensyokyo really just fits Mahjong, this kind of idleness, this leisurely, willing to waste time and energy on these frivolous contests. The winner is really just for bragging rights. There's no real sense of uh, wealth transference in Gensokyo. There's nothing that anybody really wants for or needs. It's a place of just kind of like mildly degenerate, perfectly peaceful, endless fun making, which really fits the whole premise of this series, which is that the Touhou characters are having a little mahjong tournament. We follow Yomu, who doesn't really have a relevant power, only in kind of a weird abstract sense that Yomu, of course, is like a swords person in Touhou, and in Mahjong, her ability to cut tiles that seem risky, tiles that might complete somebody's winning hand. She has the courage and boldness to cut them again and again and again, refusing to fold, playing dangerously, having faith only in the unlikelihood that it actually will backfire on her. Which I kind of like as a point of contrast, when everybody else is doing all sorts of crazy things and abusing the rules and getting away with whatever. Yomu plays like a very honest, straightforward mahjong, which also tracks given that, she learns mahjong at the beginning of the series, and this is like her debut performance. So lots and lots of fun if you like Touhou, and I think the mahjong action is also really good. A lot of very clever developments, a lot of cool considerations around team play, using your powers to kind of help each other out, and then kind of reading what expectations you should have around people's capabilities and their own objectives within games. And a lot of personality coming out through the Mahjong play itself, which I think is always a strong sign of good Mahjong writing, is that just from the tiles discarded and the hands attempted and stuff, you get a sense of what personality this character has. And I feel like this person really understands the Touhou characters and was able to represent them in that way. So I was very happy with this. I was kind of shocked and disappointed that it ended when it did. It seemed very plausible that it would just keep going after this tournament and find more excuses to play and introduce more Touhou characters and seeing their powers, and could have gone on for endless volumes, and I hope somebody else kind of takes up this torch and explores this concept. I think very easily you could make, you could make a great fan game here as well. Maybe already like Maj Soul has some Touhou collaborations, I don't know. But yeah, very impressed with this one. I think there is kind of like some respectability in just kind of capturing this one event, this one tournament, and then being like, all right, now we'll just have this nice kind of peaceful finale, and not, pushing it further and further and further. But I would have liked to see more. Honestly, yeah, I would have liked to see more. Okay. Next, we have the One Day Outing Foreman. This has become one of my favorite manga, not just because of the quality of the manga itself, which I love, but because of the experience reading it. It was coming out on nearly a daily basis due to the efforts of Chinchiro Addict, super dedicated scanlator, who not only would provide completely typeset, translated, edited works, I think entirely by himself, but also left a lot of really good translation notes and conversation starters in the comments on Manga Decks, which led to me and maybe a dozen or so other people really becoming quite consistent and active in posting our thoughts after each chapter, which really became a very, very nice community, one that I've really cherished over the last, I don't know, half a year or so. The pace at which these chapters came out, I really cannot overstate how amazing an effort it was, such that this 19-volume series, which is still ongoing, is now almost completely scanlated. He is now almost caught up to the chapters coming out in Japan, which will actually really slow the typical frequency of new ones. But it's, I think, worth it. It's just so exciting to think that we're now seeing these new adventures alongside Japan, alongside everyone else in the world. And yeah, I mean, as great as all of that is, it wouldn't mean anything if the manga itself wasn't also fantastic. But it has evolved into such a rich, interesting, and surprisingly emotionally deep slice of life series. So the premise here is bizarre to begin with. Basically, in one arc of Fukamoto's legendary series Kaiji, he is trapped in an underground labor camp and basically is trying to gamble his way out of it. The thing he's trying to purchase using the camp's kind of store money is an outing pass, which will allow him to go back up to the surface world for a set amount of time, at which point, he's going to, of course, keep gambling and try to make enough money to get his permanent freedom. So, the major obstacle in this arc is the foreman of his section of the labor camp who organizes these gambles. He is a corrupt, dirty, twisted man who delights in cheating, ripping off the denizens of the labor camp, his peers, forcing them into a second layer of debt to him, prolonging their sentences and stays underground, and depriving them of all niceties that they may be able to enjoy to offset that miserable condition. Kaiji, of course, ultimately triumphs over him. It's an amazing moment. Honestly, one of my favorite arcs in the whole series. Go check it out. I don't want to say anything more than that. But despite that, this diabolical man got his entire own spin-off series, which again is 19 volumes long now, which is all about him using his considerable underground store money fortune to repeatedly take day trips up to the surface world and enjoy the pleasantries and delights and foods of the surface world of Japan. So a typical chapter will have him and typically his two friends, and then one of the staff that's meant to supervise him, Miyamoto, has now become his bud and hangs out with them. And they just journey to go try like a new restaurant. And there's a lot of discussion of the food, and there's a lot of banter and a lot of analysis of social situations. It has a very sitcom-y feel. Already, if you know me, you're like, yeah, that's that's your cup of tea right there. But what has amazed me is that as the series progresses, they've told such an insane diversity of stories, sometimes shifting genre entirely. There was a very sci fi esque chapter lately. Sometimes, making it so kind of cringeworthy and awkward as it delves into these almost Curb Your Enthusiasm esque scenarios before whisking you up to a very wholesome moment of catharsis. There's some surprisingly deep meditations on, what is a good way to spend your time? What is an ideal career life balance? What are the struggles of a single father or someone who is beleaguered by overwork or someone who believes that they'll never find true love and is just awkwardly stumbling around the dating scene in probably his 50s or 60s. All of this and more is explored with like a nice, wholehearted sincerity. And on top of that, you just get this absolutely delectable selection of not just food, but, tourism destinations and experiences like flower viewing or camping, cooking tutorials, or the joy of finding a great video game in a chapter that is very, very clearly modeled on Slay the Spire. It's phenomenal. I really can't overstate it how much I'm enjoying this series, and I really also cannot overstate how amazed I am by the efforts of Junichiro Addict in bringing it to English speakers. Yeah, congratulations on making it this far. I'm really looking forward to reading more chapters. Please keep it up, and I would encourage everyone to hop on the Foreman train. It's the new hot wave. Everybody's talking about this Foreman. Yeah, it's really good stuff. It's becoming like one of my favorite manga ever. Okay, next I wanted to talk about this series, Akari. This, I believe, is just a single volume release. It has a very unique, soft, kind of sketchy art style that reminds me a lot of kind of watercolor paintings. It really is the type of manga that you encounter quite seldomly, especially scanlated. It's not something that, pops up in magazines that you've probably heard of, or at least in my plebeian tastes, isn't really discussed when people are talking about the typical kind of manga genres. It's something that kind of falls out of all that sort of categorization and might kind of occupy the same spot as other sort of indie or artistic manga that, I don't know, it moves in different circles is I guess what I'm trying to say. And this one I also probably would have never heard of were it not for the fact that the scanlator that picked it up frequents a Discord server I hang out in. And I think maybe the theme of this episode of Manga Chat is this sort of scanlator appreciation, because not only do I really respect that they picked up such an obscure series, one that certainly I don't think is having a whole lot of demand to be read among Western manga fans, but just out of their own interest, out of their own appreciation for the quality of the series. And then I also just really appreciate that I am in this sort of community. I typically don't really discuss manga all that much online. Things like the Foreman comment section or this manga server are definitely exceptions. But I really, really appreciated that I was there when I was linked the series, because, again, I just really don't know how I would have encountered it otherwise. And it's just lovely stuff. It's about an old man who recently lost his wife. He teaches a local class on making things out of stained glass. One day he encounters a woman that he believes to be his granddaughter, and they start this very kind of timid and reserved, but ultimately very mutually fulfilling relationship, with him not knowing and her unable to articulate the fact that she is not in fact his granddaughter, but another woman with the same name. We're already only 2 chapters in. I think there'll probably be another 5 or so I can't really at all say where the story is going. But it's already provided me with a lot of really moving and contemplative moments. My favorite, I think, is in the latest chapter. She's trying to make a small mosaic out of stained glass, and throughout the entire chapter, she kind of keeps redoing it, and no one can quite recognize what it is that she's trying to make, until at the end, the man recognizes that she is making what his house looks like from the outside, with certain windows lit up and certain areas cast into darkness. And just that small moment of epiphany, that connection where, in recognizing that and her making that, it represents so much of each of their longing, what each of them feels like they've lost, and what each of them can gain from one another. It's really great stuff, and I'm excited too to learn about stained glass to a greater extent. I remember when I was pretty young, I tried stained glass as like a gifted class activity, I think. And I had a real hard time with it. I found it like terrifying to cut the glass. I was so worried that I was going to cut my hands. I couldn't get the pressure right. It kept shattering when I snapped it. So it's not like a super pleasant memory. But I think manga is such an amazing medium to explore all of these niche experiences of life in a really kind of like empathetic and encouraging way. And so now I have like another memory associated with stained glass, which is the series, and may kind of counterbalance my interest in it in the future. I'm a hobby addict. I like learning new skills. I like creating things. I like finding new ways to express myself. And now it kind of feels like stained glass is something that I would enjoy, that I would like to seek out sometime in the future. So yeah, I don't know. I think manga, just because of the sheer variety, because the barrier to entry is so low, because you can consume so much of it, as evidenced by my life, it really, I think, is the perfect medium to kind of explore these hobbies, these interests, these opportunities, and kind of see in this warm, empathetic, welcoming light whether or not you might enjoy them in real life too. So yeah, really good stuff. Looking forward to reading more. Thanks again to the scan later. I hope they I don't remember their name, so I can't call them out exactly. I'm sorry. Okay. Next, we'll talk about Hunter x Hunter. Okay, so you may have heard pretty crazy, pretty exciting news. Hunter x Hunter is finally returning from its long hiatus, gracing once again the pages of Weekly Shonen Jump after, I think, like 3 years, maybe even more. I suppose I could check, but I'm too lazy. A long time, to be sure. And if you've seen my other videos, you know that I am dedicated to reading the entire Jump magazine, talking about it at length, ranking and reviewing things in my head, basically turning the magazine into this sort of like database of manga enjoyment, which is maybe a little insane, but whatever, that's what I'm in for. And so, of course, I'm going to have to start reading these new Hunter x Hunter chapters as they come out starting in October. And what that means is that I have to get caught up on it. Now, I started reading Hunter x Hunter when I was a pretty little kid on the site One Manga. And I talked about this in the last episode of Manga Chat, but back then, I read manga like really randomly. I didn't see the value in actually starting from the start and reading all of the chapters. I don't know why. I remember doing this at the time with like Harry Potter books too, that I would just kind of like flip through them at random and like look for interesting things. I don't know if it was because I thought reading through it in the conventional way was like too boring or was like unnecessary to get to the good stuff. But basically, yeah, I read like random chunks and random arcs when I was like 12 or 13. And then at another point in my later teens, I think on another manga consolidation site, at first on One Manga and then probably later on, I don't know, Batoto or something, I took another effort at reading it from the start and got to, I want to say, around the start of the Chimera Ant arc. And then for some reason, I don't remember why, I just stopped again. And so now there's a big chunk of chapters after that I have not ever read, and a whole bunch of stuff at the beginning that I didn't really think I remembered all too well. And basically, I'm just going to read the whole thing again. I have the free time. As I've said before, my lifestyle right now is very conducive to manga reading. A lot of time where I can just read it on my phone or on my second monitor in parallel with doing other things I need to do, which is great. That's the type of life I like to live. So I've been getting through it. Right now, I am in the very start of the Greed Island arc. I'm surprised by how much I remember. Not just like, I could have told you already the general gist of all the arcs and most of the characters and what their deals are. But as I read it, I was surprised to realize that like very specific like moments and images, just pages suddenly leapt out to me and like resonated with a memory deep in my head. Not just from the time that I reread it in my later teens, but I can remember reading it even as like a 12-year-old, specific scenes and panels and stuff, which is kind of crazy. And it almost kind of makes me sad because I feel like manga I've read lately does not have that same impact on me. Earlier this year I read all of Toriko. I loved it. I can still remember, the gist of it, but I don't think there's that much, cemented, resonant images that decades later I'm going to look at and go, boom, yeah, I can remember the instant that I read this. And that's just how the brain works, that's just neuroplasticity and stuff. The stuff that you encounter when you're young is just capable of making that much of an impression on you. Nowadays, I've read so much more manga, everything just makes a smaller increase in the total volume of manga I've read. In the past, I was filling up like a thimble with these experiences, and they were so overwhelmingly powerful. And now I've got like a bathtub of manga that I've read, and I'm still just dripping in new chapters, and you can hardly tell sometimes. Anyways, all these kind of bittersweet memories aside, what am I thinking about Hunter x Hunter? How am I enjoying it? Overall, I quite like it, although I do now remember a lot of the things that kind of frustrated me when I was reading it before. Stuff I like, it's very much an adventure-based shonen. It's a battle shonen as well, and it's a lot of other things too. But at the end of the day, I would say, for me at least, the primary appeal and the primary way that arcs are motivated is by taking our lovable protagonists and having them embark into places unknown and really relishing in the setting and things to learn and cultural differences and new opportunities but new dangers. I think this is a pretty big contrast with how a lot of shonen manga is written these days. Nowadays, it feels like everything is kind of urban fantasy. It typically takes place in like modern Japan. The set dressing and stuff is all around the mechanics of the fights and of the supernatural elements and all of that stuff. And the actual setting, the places that the characters are journeying to and occupying, are tried to be made like very familiar, so that you can get that kind of like alarming contrast of, oh my god, Sukuna is massacring people in Shibuya. I know where Shibuya is. Whereas here, and in a lot of other series like this, like Toriko and One Piece, which are pretty contemporary, you're going to new places. Like you can go to York New, which is certainly modeled after New York, but it has all sorts of unique things just made up for this world. There's a sense of wonderment and adventure and discovery, and I just love that stuff. I absolutely love that style of shonen, and I wish that there was more of it these days. One Piece is kind of now the major torchbearer for this style of writing. So I really like that. I really like all the characters. I love how many characters they're willing to introduce you to, but how much like personality is given to each of them, such that you really felt like Togashi was like, oh, well, this might actually be a focal point of a future arc, this character. So we're going to load him up with a lot of stuff, We're gonna make him as interesting as possible with all sorts of quirks and mysteries around his powers. And then we just have that as a resource. He can show up at any time. It's sort of similar to One Piece, I think. One Piece, I think the focus is typically on making a really strong image that you just kind of want to explore and sparks the imagination and stuff. Whereas here, obviously there is a big diversity of character design and everything, but I think there's a big focus on like power and motivation. That everyone kind of keeps the details of their Nen powers secret. It could be like anything. You don't really know exactly what people's motives are. There's a lot of investigation into character, into what they prioritize, into what lines they can or cannot cross. So it's very psychological in that regard. And it almost reminds me of like a Fukumoto series sometimes when it gets really into the weeds of people predicting each other's actions and having these complex kind of like rules and cascading consequences. The York New arc especially really dives into this stuff with all of the really complicated hostage negotiation. But even as far back as the original Hunter exam, which I think remains my favorite arc, the sequence where everybody has buttons with specific targets and trying to negotiate who gets what button and stuff. It's all very cool. It's just such an interesting way to kind of set both the psychological tone and feeling, but then also just kind of the structure of how the fights are going to play out. Really cool stuff. I generally like the fight scenes as well. I like that they have a nice mix of cool choreographed action. I think the way Togashi actually draws like the raw punch kick action of fight scenes is pretty unique and interesting. Very stylized. Very like fast and concise. But then there's also kind of the puzzle element where you're trying to work out the specific rules of each person's nen and how they interact and how you can counter different things. Lots of fun to be had there. Okay. Things that I dislike. Man, do these arcs get complicated and slow. It just feels like Togashi kind of gets in his own way in a lot of situations where you have such a strong premise. We're going to an auction. There's all sorts of unimaginably cool treasures up for display. We got to make a lot of money because we want to win this video game. At the same time, the auction has also attracted the attention of this cruel, evil mercenary gang that Kurapika wants revenge on. That's a great setup. And I think for most people, the way that would play out is maybe a small mini arc about them trying to raise money semi-successfully, some ups and downs and comedic moments. And then ultimately one big climactic fight that transpires during a one-day auction where all of these threads of loyalty and all of the inner conflicts of the spiders and everything, all of that can be brought to bear and be introduced kind of all in that big climactic moment. Instead, this is like a multi-year long arc where over the like 7 days of the auction, it is just sort of like repeated kidnapping, hostage negotiations, counter hostage negotiations, complicated rules where both sides have the capability to read people's memories to varying extents, but there's a lot of rules about it. And then Kurapika can enact rules that you have to follow or you die, creating this really complicated chess game. Barely any actual auction footage is ever seen. The number of treasures we see or hear about is like 5. There's a very complicated and involved sequence around trying to find valuable things to resell to make money to make the game, but it's just wallows so deeply within its own details of okay, so how do you recognize that this vault is legit and that the jewels within it are legit? How can you get a legit vault that has illegit jewels? What are the different methods of... And it's not bad. None of the stuff is bad. It's all quite interesting and well written. But it really is a sense of like you're putting the cart before the horse. You're so caught up and enamored with all of these little details of the world that you're building, which I think is good, to be really passionate and involved in the world building that you do. But it's getting in the way of like a just nice, straightforward shonen arc, you know? And it doesn't even need to be like straightforward in terms of simple, but just straightforward in terms of like in every situation you feel like it's being drawn towards one big climactic conclusion. Whereas many of the plot threads in this are like, oh, well, we gotta convince Kurapika to not go fight them. So now the like motivating action of the plot is to like avoid a conflict. You know what I'm saying? Like it just kind of all tangles itself so much that there isn't really strong emotional through lines that you can have. Because it's like, yeah, you're probably emotionally invested in Kurapika getting revenge for his clan. Maybe you're emotionally invested in Gon getting this video game so he can learn about his dad. And if those are the things you care about, then like 75% of these chapters, you're just going like, okay, but why? Why am I hearing about this? Why am I hearing about oh, and then the whole thing with like the fortunes, this woman that can produce accurate poetic fortunes of what will happen to you, and then all of the intrigue that's like built around that. It's all so complex, and yet it serves such simple ultimate plot motivators that it just kind of feels like there's a disconnect, that things could be a lot more like fluid. And I don't know if you can attribute this to Togashi just kind of writing too loosely on the seat of his pants. I certainly felt that the way this arc wrapped up so quickly and then just instantly transitioned into Greed Island, that at some point there was maybe some editorial intervention that it's like, hey, you've been doing this arc for like a year. You know, obviously Togashi gets a lot of leeway in Jump. You can tell from the like multi-year hiatuses. You know, once you make Yu Yu Hakusho, you're kind of like a golden boy for life. But I gotta wonder, like, it seems like he's kind of at war with himself, at war with the progression of his series. I don't know. It's and I'll admit it. I don't really like Nen as a power system. I think it's overly complicated with too much terminology, and there's so much kind of like baked in strategy of, oh well, this type of Nen user can kind of counter that type of Nen user, but if you use this type of power, then you're capped out at using that other type of power at like 40%. And then on top of that, everybody has their own special, unique techniques that all have a million rules. And it's like, I can see how that would appeal to a certain type of reader, but that sort of reader isn't me. And in a lot of these kind of like complex power type systems, like JJK is a great example, I appreciate when they can kind of live on two different levels simultaneously, that you can enjoy a good fight scene without needing to understand all of the mechanical lore for why certain moves work on certain other moves. Whereas here, it feels like it really kind of impedes the progress on occasion, that suddenly we're just launched into multiple chapters full of diagrams about different types of Nen and the flow of Nen and how to control Nen, and it just kind of makes my brain squirm, because I'm like, I don't care. This just isn't the type of thing I care about, you know, and that's just a mismatch between me and the series, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Overall, I'm very much enjoying it, but I'm also kind of understanding why, as a kid, I gave up on reading it or would skip chapters or whatever. Now, as an adult with patience and the ability to appreciate things on more levels than the immediate, I am looking forward to just reading through all of it. I'm looking forward to a lot of parts that I can remember. And I'm looking forward to the parts that I haven't seen yet. I'm very, very curious about those. And like the rest of the world, I'm very, very curious about the new chapters, too. So yeah, you'll hear about this more in my Jump videos and maybe in another one of these before then. But yeah, let me know. Like, I know that Hunter x Hunter has a lot of shooters. There's people out there that this is like their favorite series, let alone their favorite shonen battle series. So let me know. Like, what is it that appeals to you? What am I maybe not grasping? What kind of mentality can I go in with it to enjoy it more? But yeah, good stuff. Still good stuff. Okay. Next, I want to talk about Sangatsu no Lion. This is actually the series that led me to join this Discord server. I just thought they were doing a really, really great job with it, and I wanted to say thanks. And as a result, I've been introduced to a lot of really wonderful people and a lot of very, very excellent manga. So again, I owe such a great debt to the Scanlation community and to this series in particular for kind of opening that door to me. Only one chapter of Sangatsu no Lion has come out recently, and it's not even, such a crazy chapter that I was like, ooh, I gotta talk about it at all costs. It's more just that I really feel like the series is drawing to a close. Not that it'll happen anytime soon, especially with this release schedule. But I do think we're kind of moving into the end game of the whole thing. And I just wanted to talk about that and talk about what I think will happen and talk about why this is such a special series to me. Actually, maybe nix that last one because I'll probably start crying or something. We'll see, we'll see. Okay, so the way I see it, the title has two major components, right? March, which refers to March Town, which is where the sisters live that Rei goes to visit and, has become involved in their life on so many levels and stuff. And the lion, which I think refers to the Shishi-O, the King of Lions tournament that Rei is participating in right now. And the whole point of the series, as far as I can tell, is that it's about making this sort of epiphany in your life that you need both. That you need something heartfelt and wonderful that values you as a human being, that cares for you and loves you and nourishes you. And you need a passion. You need something that you expend that energy in, that you use to quest out boldly into the world and achieve some sense of excellence, some sense of self-actualization, of achievement, of triumph. And that only by having both of these can you really appreciate either of them. That only by working hard and wearing yourself out and doing your best can you truly enjoy and get the most out of that nourishment and that support and that comfort and that rest. And in turn, without that comfort and rest, you'll never, ever, ever be able to reach anywhere near your full potential in those areas of passion, in those areas of striving and achievement and challenge. To me, that is really the message that is given by this series, not just for Rei's character, but for every character we encounter. They each need to appreciate both halves of their life like that. They each find revelations and development in achieving that balance and achieving, being able to have both. And so I think at the end of the series, which again I think we're building towards now, we're going to see in both arenas kind of like a moment of breakthrough and finality and catharsis. So I think, and this is kind of my bold claim, Rei is gonna win the cup. He's going to get the right to challenge by beating Shimuda, and in what I think will be a profoundly beautiful and moving exploration of character, he's actually going to beat Toya Meijin and get a title. And that might seem unrealistic, and maybe, it's kind of absurd to suggest that Rei at age like 18 is going to get one of the major shogi titles. And it's not like we've ever been given any reason to think that Toya Meijin is not like an indomitable titan of shogi. So maybe this is kind of delusional on my part. But I think if they build it up in the right way through messaging, through contrast of Rei before the series started, who kind of idolized Soya Meijin because he had so little in his life and saw Soya as this just sort of personified deity of shogi, which, was Rei's only hope for happiness or anything. And then contrasting that with now, when Rei is such a whole and complete person with friends and a family and love. And I don't know, maybe this is harsh to Soya Meijin, but we get the sense that his life truly is just shogi. And yeah, he has comrades and friends, and he has obviously moments of great brilliance and triumph. But remember the earlier arc where they get caught in the rainstorm together, and his hearing impediment becomes kind of like a major problem, and he seems like unable to know how to handle the situation, and Rei kind of has to help him out. It's kind of suggesting to me that we're going to ultimately see Soya as sort of flawed, as someone who as well needs to kind of learn lessons, even though he has achieved everything there is to achieve in shogi. And I think that will be kind of like the final crowning moment when Rei becomes the Lion King, and wins this title, that he has had this breakthrough, that he understands what it truly means to compete. And likewise, I think a similar revelation will happen with the sisters. I don't know what exactly it will be, but some feeling of security in their future and security in running the store. It could be something as bittersweet as the grandfather passing on, and a feeling of them truly inheriting the store and feeling confident and stepping into that. But he's a spry fellow, so that's also kind of hard to believe. But I don't know. Something like that. Some major progression in their life that in turn will kind of bond. Obviously Hina-chan and Rei are like dating now. But will now kind of like further bond and cement that connection between him and the sisters, and this kind of new family that they've built together. Because yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's like much other stuff left to do. I don't think this is going to be a series where you can go down the checklist and be like, yep, all of these guys have had arcs, yep, all of these guys have found happiness, blah, blah, blah. Yep, all these issues have been addressed. But I think at the same time, you can tell if there's stuff that's like outstanding, stuff that really would feel remiss if it wasn't kind of addressed at some capacity. And I think the biggest ones are Soya Meijin as a character. It feels like he's maybe still too mysterious, that we haven't really had a crucial intimacy with him. And the sisters' kind of overall feelings about the future, there still kind of seems to be uncertainty and doubts and an unreadiness that still kind of permeates their thinking, although obviously step by step they're getting closer to something else. So that's it. That's my expectation for the end of the series. This is definitely one of my favorite manga of all time, adapted into definitely my favorite anime of all time. Every chapter we get, as seldom as we get them, is an absolute joy, and shoutouts to Cool and the rest of the Sun Also Rises team for bringing them to us as soon as they're capable of, as soon as they come out. Yeah, really, really good stuff. I really can't get into how much I love this series, because A, it's like going to be an hour-long rambling rant that B, probably involves some crying, and I still have a work meeting later today, so I can't be doing that. Okay. Let's move on to finally Kinnikuman. In the first episode of Manga Chat, I talked about picking up this series and how much fun I was having with its absurd gag comedy stylings. Now I am quite a few volumes in later. I am now just finishing the second Shojin Olympics arc, and it has changed dramatically. It really has come into its own as I'm not going to go so far as to say serious. Every chapter still has some jokes and moments of goofiness or irreverence, but a battle shonen that cares about its battles, where the battles aren't just treated as punchlines and resolved in one page, but where we have multi-chapter battles that focus a lot on the back and forth technique. We have intrigue, we have twists, we have suspense, we have moments of tragedy, we have moments of heroism and selflessness. All of these qualities that maybe had shown up in the first few volumes, again, as like the setup or punchline of a joke, are now the meat of the story, the Niku of the story. And a keen Niku it is indeed. I am surprised at how caught up I am in these plot lines, given how, silly the characters are at first glance and how bizarre the stakes are. And, saying that now, it actually really reminds me of wrestling. Because as well in wrestling, before I got into it, I would have thought this is far too absurd and goofy for me to ever take seriously. But inevitably, as I watch good matches, I get so caught up in it. My heart pounds. I'm on the edge of my seat cheering for my guy. And it's coming more and more true of Kinniku as well. It's really fascinating to me how much this has truly become a wrestling manga, which I understood would eventually be the case. But it transforms into this quite drastically and quite unilaterally. I've spoken before, I think, in some videos about how mind-blowing it was for me to discover, hey, wrestling isn't like, wow, it's basically just like shonen battle manga. Shonen battle manga is based on wrestling. It's the causality is in the opposite direction. It took me a long time to really appreciate that. But you can see it here as one of the series that really built the genre and built people's expectations of battle shonen. You can see the transformation from wrestling tropes, from wrestling story beats and character archetypes and matches into the type of matches and superpower wars and power scaling debates that made kind of the backbone of battle shonen from this era onwards. You can see the influence firsthand, and it's really, really cool and really, really engrossing. It also made me appreciate that how old so many kind of like wrestling staple tropes are. Because I got into wrestling quite recently, and I can know in the abstract, yeah, all of this stuff goes back to like the 50s. But to see a chapter that came out in like 1980s, and they're having like a coffin death match, and it's like, yeah, wow, they've been doing this kind of thing for decades, for like almost 50 years now. These sort of wrestling stunts have been part of the ecosystem, have been part of the culture. It's really, really cool stuff. A really unique experience, I think. Especially coming at it as I am, a recent fan of wrestling that knows some history to some extent, and then a huge fan of Battle Shonen, where I know a ton of stuff, but this is still a new series that I hadn't really explored before. So yeah, great stuff. I'm really excited to see more, and I've sure got a whole lot more to read. I'm about 120 chapters-ish out of 900 or so. So a long road to go. I'm sure I will keep reporting in on my feelings in these videos if I have opportunities to. So yeah. I don't know. I feel like I had a lot to say about Kinnikuman. Can't believe how violent it gets. But I guess, that's wrestling as well. Sometimes it gets a little gory, just to keep you on your toes, just to keep you interested. Yeah, lots of weird stuff in it, though, too. It really feels like it's from an era pre-regulation. Not that there was ever any kind of, like, formal reevaluation of what is suitable to be in Jump or not. Obviously at some point we lost nipples, RIP seeing boobs and Jump, and bit by bit other things become unacceptable, and here it truly is the Wild West, which is a lot of fun. Oh yeah, and I thought it was so weird that we find out that Kinnikuman is wearing a mask. And that underneath his mask there is another face, and I've never seen it before. I've seen a ton of random merch of Kinnikuman and random character designs over the years, you know, just through that kind of otaku osmosis, you encounter this stuff. I don't think I maybe I have and I didn't recognize what it was. I don't think I've ever seen Kinnikuman's like real face. So do we ever see it? Do we see it, but it's just sort of brief and didn't create a bunch of merchandise or whatever? Did they eventually just forget about this idea? It really surprised me when all of that went down. Yeah, I don't know. Crazy stuff. And yeah, that's the last manga I had to talk about. See you on the next one, which will be whenever. Bye.